From what I from what I have gathered in research and in my study of history, the 70s were a big change, a big turning point in AA. And things were different before Joe and Charlie, and they are different after Joe and Charlie, as far as a lot of the things we talk about and the way we do some things. Of course, everybody's different and all the groups are different. It depends on where you are. But a lot of, I think, new vocabulary and new ideas and things came in. Not all of them, well, I don't want to say good, but
Mm.
they're like any change. There are some things that, aren't what we would, there were probably positive and negative things that came out of the 70s and the 80s. But there definitely was a big change. And
Big change, like
so,
what happened in 2019. A lot of big change happened with writing the big book, The Creation of AA, when that came about. And we're on chapter 24 of that tonight. We're on chapter 24 of that, editing Bill Steps. And I think, yes, you got me on that one, Jim D. I did put 23 on that flyer, one of the flyers I sent out. I do apologize about that. So, Jim, I do apologize to you. Promptly admit it when I'm wrong. I did get that wrong. One flyer I put out. So, Jim D, thank you. So it's good to have Jim D here. And we've got a couple of new people here as well tonight. And we might come to you when we get into the Q&A after, say hello to you. That is after the chapter. So we've got the author of writing the big book, The Creation of AA, Bill Schaberg, with us this evening on, as I said, chapter 24. And we've also got Jim Worley going to read along with us. And Jim, of course, is with that Facebook great historical site of AA and AA History Only, underline only there. So you're on page 459 of writing the big book, and we've got 20 pages to do. So with that, chapter 24, editing Bill Steps, December 1938, and it's over to the author, Bill Schaberg.
Thank you, David. According to Bill, he didn't have long to wait before he encountered the first negative reaction to his brilliant new formulation of their program of recovery. Just minutes after the 12 steps were written, he said he walked downstairs and discovered some strong resistance already waiting for him in the kitchen.
at this moment, a couple of late callers arrived. One of them was my boon companion of those days, Howard A. With him was a newcomer, dry, barely 3 months. I was greatly pleased with what I had written, and I read them the new version of the program, now the 12 steps. Howard and his friend reacted violently. Why 12 steps? They demanded. And then, you've got too much God in these steps. You'll scare people away. And what do you mean by getting these drunks down on their knees when they ask to have all their shortcomings removed? And who wants all their shortcomings removed anyhow? As he saw my uneasiness, Howard added, well, some of this stuff does sound pretty good after all, but Bill, you've got to tone it down. It's too stiff. The average alcoholic just won't buy it the way it stands.
The arguments over religion versus psychology.
The exact identity of this quote unquote Howard A has proven to be a real mystery.
The only known sober AA named Howard before 1939 was Dr. Howard Searle, an Akron member who stopped drinking in January 1937. And he is in Frank Amos's detailed mention of him in the February 1938 Notes on Akron, Ohio survey. Pass It On, the book, has a footnote on page 206 claiming that this Howard A was really Horace C., and that Bill used a pseudonym here because of a dispute between them, and he, quote, did not wish to offend Horace C. by using his name, close quotes. While this would be true of the Howard mentioned on pages 186 and 192 of Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, parentheses, the fact there perfectly correspond to Horace Crystal's AA board activities during those times, close parentheses. The mention on page 161 does not match up at all with what we know of the man. Most especially, Horace wasn't even sober on the day the steps were written. He didn't stop drinking until December 16th, 1938. at least 2 weeks after Bill wrote these steps. And this is in Horace Crystal's questionnaire, which is in the GSO archives. One of these documents has as the date of his sobriety, December 16th, 1938. And also there's a second unnumbered document in the GSO archives, which lists his sobriety date as December 1938. This leaves no obvious candidate for who this late night visitor, quote unquote, Howard A, might have actually been, although he does sound suspiciously like Hank Parkhurst, who had certainly been Bill's, quote, boon companion of those days, close quotes.
Amen and thank you, Gigi. The exact identity of this quote-unquote Howard A has proven to be a real mystery, as we just learned, casting some doubt on Bill's recollection of the entire exchange. But whatever the truth might be about this particular encounter, Wilson's presentation of the 12 steps did touch off a wave of argument in New York. His succinct formulation of, quote, the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery, end quote, quickly brought to a head all the resentments that had been quietly festering just below the surface between those New York members who wanted the book to be a powerfully religious document and those who thought it should be a psychological book. Bill had complained to Dr. Bob just 1 month earlier that he was finding it, quote, pretty hard to get people to voice their real opinions, as they are too much afraid of hurting the author's feelings, end quote. But all that changed in December. The 12 Steps was the catalyst that dragged all of those long simmering disagreements over religion, spirituality, and belief out into the open, where they could no longer be ignored. AA's mythology claims that these loud and contentious arguments dominated the Tuesday night meetings in Brooklyn throughout the month of December. But that was not the case. The different disagreements that did arise at those meetings were of the more genteel sort already mentioned here, as members made relatively minor suggestions for changes they thought Bill should make to what he is writing for the book. Striking testimony to the relative civility of these discussions comes from Tom Burrell, who was a newcomer when he attended a New York weekly gathering in late November and December of 1938. In a talk recorded years later, Tom supplied some lively and colorful details for what was happening at those important meetings.
After the meatballs and spaghetti, or whatever we had, this same tall, lanky guy, Bill Wilson, came out of the dining room with a legal pad, and he sprawled out on the floor with his back to the folding doors, and he started to read what he had written on this legal pad, and that was one of the chapters of the big book. And of course, it made little to no sense to me at the time. Maybe I was too fogged up or didn't get the full significance of this thing. But at any rate, I listened while those folks wrangled. Change a comma here, a question mark here. One said, you don't put that in, put this in. And finally the meeting was ended.
This picture of Bill sprawled out on the floor as he reads aloud from a handwritten yellow legal pad is the most captivating and compelling image we have of the group participation in the editing of the big book. Burrell's story of those December nights puts the listener right in the room with Wilson and the other AA members as they try to fine-tune their message for getting people sober all across the country. Since 8 of the 10 expositional chapters had already been written by this time, Bill could only have been reading from his rough drafts of How It Works and In Action, the 2 chapters which explain in detail what was involved in actually working the 12 steps. Listening to this, the Clinton Street members, quote-unquote, wrangled over commas, question marks, and made some suggestions for revisions to the text. It's an appealing picture, but hardly the legendary fights. Quote, we fought, bled, and died our way through one chapter after another, end quote, so often depicted in later recountings.
There definitely were big fights, first over the 12 steps and then about the way Bill was explaining them in the 2 final chapters he was creating for the book. But those loud and contentious arguments took place at the honor dealer's office over in Newark, not at the meetings in Brooklyn. As Ruth Hawk later noted, the major changes made to the steps and the book were, quote, fought out in the office where you, Hank, and Fitz and I were present, end quote. Rather than arguing publicly at the weekly meetings, Bill, Hank, and Fitz had wisely decided to have it out in private at the honor dealer's office, where they could be as combative and confrontational as they liked, without fear of splitting the New York group into openly warring factions. Jim Burwell consistently claimed it was, quote unquote, the trio of Bill Wilson, Hank Parkhurst, and Fitz Mayo who ran AA during these early days. And Ruth's testimony about these arguments in Newark certainly lends some credibility to that observation.
Fitz loses the argument for a religious approach.
It was there that Fitz, who, quote, made constant journeys to New York in order to reinforce the conservative position, end quote, pled his case for a specifically Christian book. The foundations of Fitz's own recovery were deeply religious, specifically Episcopalian, and he insisted that their program of recovery had to be explained using biblical terminology and presented as a quote-unquote doctrinal and explicitly Christian solution to alcoholism. This approach found some support among a few other New York members. Parentheses, Bill specifically mentions Paul Kellogg, who, quote, was even more emphatic than Fitz about this, close quote, close parentheses. And it was surely what most of the quote unquote alcoholic squad in Akron would have expected to find in any book explaining how they got sober. But however vehemently Fitz may have argued for his position, Bill Wilson had already made all the concessions he was going to make in the direction of a purely Christian solution for alcoholism. Such a specifically religious approach was almost universally recognized by AA members as the very thing that had thwarted the missions in all their past efforts to save drunks. At least on this point, Wilson was in complete agreement with the largest contingent in the New York group, who had no problem at all with the use of the term God throughout the book, but who were, quote, dead set against any theological propositions, end quote, or religious doctrines being mentioned. While at this time the suggested road to recovery included a regular habit of reading the New Testament, Bill clearly recognized that such a specifically Christian emphasis would sabotage any hope they might have of successfully reaching out to agnostics and atheists, not to mention the problems it would cause for both Catholics and Jews.
Exactly what Bill might have said to placate Fitz Mayo on these issues is not known. But then no one ever described Fitz as a great debater or as a man who was comfortable fighting for his own perspective. Instead, Mayo was regularly characterized as, quote, one of the most lovable people that AA will ever know, end quote, and as, quote, a charming, aesthetic, impractical, lovable dreamer, end quote. In fact, his personality was the exact opposite of Hank Parkhurst, so it seems a bit unfair to learn that Bill was more or less threw Fitz to the wolves by letting Hank act as his proxy in this fight. While his two primary colleagues battled, Wilson sat back and watched as Parkhurst and Mayo engaged in a, quote, a hot argument about the religious content of the coming volume, end quote. It was a fight Fitz had no hope of winning.
Hank loses the argument to completely remove God from the steps.
On the other hand, Bill's argument with the much more confrontational Henry Parkhurst was so loud and antagonistic that they could not escape later comment. Quote, a terrific argument ensued between Hank and me, end quote, Wilson said, and it seemed to last forever. Quote, the heated discussions went on for days and nights, end quote. Hank was absolutely no intention of conceding he might be wrong about what he wanted. Once Fitz's plea for a Christian book had been successfully demolished, Parkhurst began to attack Wilson for his constant explicit reference to God in both the steps and throughout the book. He was convinced this would not only drive people away from their solution, but even worse, destroy any hope of the book being a bestseller. Despite the fact that so much was already written, Hank still had not given up hope that they would publish a psychological book, one that, quote, would lure the alcoholic in, end quote, and that, quote, once in, the prospect could take God or leave him alone as he wished, end quote. Bill found this to be a shocking proposal and refused to even consider it. Wilson justified his inclusion of these frequent references to God by citing his personal experience. I've had this very sudden experience and was on the pious side, so I larded these steps very heavily with the word God. Footnote.
This is another, though less explicit, admission by Wilson that the 12 steps were mainly based on his own experience rather than the collective experience of the group.
Doing so made perfect sense to Bill, parenthesis, and was in keeping with his penchant for relying primarily on his own experience, close parenthesis. But Hank would have none of it, and they raged against each other in a fierce running battle. Wilson called it a, quote, perfectly ferocious argument, end quote, which neither man was willing to concede an inch of ground to the other. Finally, after a, quote unquote, hellish fight, Hank realized there was no hope of convincing Bill all of these references to God should be removed from the steps, and he adopted a fallback position. Could we at least, he argued, get rid of this demand that people get down on their knees in the 7th step and then tone down the rest of the religious language by using some more general, less theologically specific synonyms for the word God? Parkhurst proposed using higher power and a power greater than ourselves in general, open-ended substitutes, and suggested that the first appearance of the word God be followed by the more expansive and explicitly flexible phrase, quote unquote, as we understand him. Besides arguing that they needed to provide some sort of way for agnostics and atheistic alcoholics to find an entry point into the steps, Hank's strongest contention for these changes would have been the fact that Bill had already used the phrase power greater than myself and God as I then understood him in his own story. If these beliefs and perspectives have been so essential to Wilson's own recovery, why shouldn't they be offering that same level of openness to all the new people who are trying so desperately to get sober?
Bill did not want to change anything in the steps, and even in the face of Hank's constant and aggressive onslaught, he absolutely, quote, refused to budge on this, end quote. Weren't they, after all, perfect just the way he had written them? In late June, Bill had told Dr. Bob Smith he was, quote, not suffering from any pride of authorship, end quote. But that was definitely not the case 6 months later. Wilson was firmly entrenched in defending the steps exactly as he had created them, and he, quote, heavily resisted these objections, end quote, on every front. Bill was not about to change a single word, parentheses. So much for the I was just an umpire claim that he later made with such regularity, close parentheses. Besides, having successfully resisted the changes Fitzmayo wanted to make, how could he possibly capitulate to Hank Parkhurst and include these more liberal phrases?
Bill Wilson finally concedes some changes.
But Hank just would not give up. And after days of arguing and badgering, Bill Wilson finally began to weaken. He later admitted rather sheepishly that, quote, it took a bit of persuasion, end quote, but Parkhurst's relentless insistence that they had to soften some of the God talk was wearing him down, and he finally conceded, quote unquote, very grudgingly, to make at least some of the suggested changes. Bill doggedly refused to take out the need for people to get down on their knees in the 7th step, parenthesis, that particular requirement would not be deleted until 3 months later, when after several more weeks of acrimonious fighting, he finally, and quote, very reluctantly took that phrase out, end quote, close parenthesis. But he did agree to use the phrase, quote, a power greater than ourselves rather than God in the 2nd step. And to add, quote unquote, as we understand them after the word God in the 3rd step, parenthesis, but not to the 11th step where it would not appear until 4 months later. That was an absolutely as far as Wilson was willing to go.
He had fought tenaciously and valiantly, but Bill was not particularly gracious in defeat. It clearly pained him to make these concessions, but he, quote unquote, finally went along, all the while defending his view that the original steps were perfect. It would take some time before Wilson realized and acknowledged how critical these phrases were to their success, and finally conceded that Hank Parkhurst had been right, especially about his insistence on adding, quote unquote, as we understood him in the third step. But Bill was always stubbornly proud of the fact that these modifications were the, quote, only changes in the 12 steps as written, close quote, and that, quote, there were no other changes in the original draft, end quote. They were, he claimed, almost perfect, just as he had first written them.
However, when Bill did finally realize how important these changes were, he enthusiastically embraced them, calling them, quote, a terrific 10-strike, end quote, noting that, quote, as we understood him, quote, was, quote, perhaps the most important expression to be found in our whole AA vocabulary, close quotes. That and the phrase, quote unquote, higher power, he said, quote, had proved lifesavers for many an alcoholic. They have enabled thousands of us to make a beginning where none could have been made had we left the steps just as I originally wrote them, end quote. Most especially, he acknowledged that adding the phrase as we understand them to the third step had made, quote, a hoop big enough so that the whole world of alcoholics can walk through it, end quote. It was a change that, quote, enabled people of fine religious training and those of none at all to associate freely and to work together. It made one's religion the business of the AA member himself and not that of his society, end quote. A 10-strike indeed.
The origin of God as we understood him in question.
Wilson hardly exaggerates when he notes that God as we understand him is perhaps the most important expression to be found in the AA lexicon. This short phrase has made membership in Alcoholics Anonymous possible for millions of people who otherwise would have never been able to cross over its threshold into sobriety. So, who is responsible for the addition of this critically important phrase?
Well, Jim Burwell always claimed credit for adding as we understood him to the steps. His earliest recorded statement on this came in a talk he gave in March of 1947. Then we took to God. This is about the only thing I have given to this thing, he said. Bill, I am an agnostic. We had quite a tussle. I had been staying sober, so had Hank. After a time, we decided to put in there, as you see it, which in my estimation is right because you are not putting pressure on them. It was the only way I could do it. A year or so later, Jim heavily revised that speech into his Evolution of Alcoholics Anonymous, which noted simply that after days of wrangling between Bill, Hank, Fitz and myself, another thing changed in this last rewriting, and that was qualifying the word God with the phrase, as we understand him. And parenthesis here by Mr. Schaberg, this was one of my, or this is by Burwell, this was one of my few contributions to the book. Then in 1955, when his story, The Vicious Cycle, made its first appearance in the second edition of the Big Book, he made the same claim about making this contribution to their literary efforts.
It is interesting and important to note that in none of these instances did Jim ever claim he invented the phrase as we understood him. Burwell just says that he was the one who insisted it to be added to the third step so that atheists and agnostics would have some flexibility in interpreting and then working the suggested program of recovery. As already noted here, when Bill wrote the first two versions of his own story the previous May, that phrase had appeared in each of them. In the first, he claimed, Ebby had told him to, quote, turn my face to God as I understand him, end quote, as the first step in his recovery. And in the second version, while describing the early steps he took, Wilson said, quote, I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, end quote. Since this second version of Bill's story had been widely circulated during the previous 6 months, Burwell could hardly say that he had invented, quote, this most important expression to be found, end quote, in AA vocabulary. But he did unequivocally claim that inserting that phrase into the third step was his own contribution to the steps. While Jim's claim has never been publicly challenged, there is some interesting private correspondence between Ruth Hawk and Bill Wilson in 1955, calling Bill Burwell's claim into serious question. Before she wrote her often quoted letter of November 10th, 1955, Ruth and Bill had already exchanged 3 letters in which he asked her for help to clarify some historical details for him. One of the questions he asked was about Jim's alleged responsibility for suggesting that they put, as we understand him, into the steps. According to his own recollection, Wilson said,
Finally, we had a big hassle in the Newark office between, as I remember, Hank Fitz, you and me. Fitz was for more God and more theology. Hank was for little or none at all. The result of this argument was the phrase, God as we understand him, which was, of course, a 10 strike. Whether or not Jimmy Burwell was present, I can't remember. In a historical piece he wrote about this period, he claimed he had great influence on the 12 steps. I certainly think he had some because of his agnosticism, but whether it was direct or not, I can't remember.
2 weeks later, Ruth's reply supported Bill's memory of those events.
The few things you mentioned basically agree with things as I remember them, but I'll be darned if I can remember that Jim Burwell ever took any active part in any of the writing of the book or the 12 steps or the name of the book. Certainly, he was never in on any of the office conferences that I remember, although he undoubtedly had an effect through the endless discussion that went on at meetings and homes, as did everyone who came to meetings at that time.
Jim claimed that he, Bill, Hank, and Fitz had wrangled for days over these issues, almost certainly in the Newark office, but Ruth contradicted this emphatically in her letter. Bill was pleased to learn Ruth's recollection matched his own.
I was most happy for your testimony about Jim Burwell's part in the early days. In my own mind, I've gone overboard to give him credit. The story he wrote up about the early days was printed, you may know, and it has considerable circulation out on the West Coast, where he now is. In a way, I suppose all our recollections are suspect.
In short, I don't remember it the way Jim does, and I'm pleased to hear that your memories are the same as mine, but I can hardly call him out on this issue since he has made these claims so publicly. Bill, ever the politician and well aware of Burwell's singular status as one of the very few early members still alive and sober in 1955, felt compelled to support Jim in his claim, or at least not to contradict him, no matter what his own memory of the facts might be. For instance, 5 years later, we find him making one of his typical statements about this, giving Jim credit by telling the audience that, quote, this expression was coined, I think, by one of our former atheistic members, end quote. The quote unquote, I think, was Wilson's not so subtle way of noting the questionability of that claim as once again he directed attention away from himself. The key question Bill had asked Ruth was whether or not Jim had any direct input into this decision, and neither of them could remember him being present or participating in the Newark arguments where that famous compromise was made. But both of them did allow that Burwell likely had some significant indirect impact on the steps, with Bill noting, quote, I certainly think he had some influence because of his agnosticism, and Ruth conceding that he, quote, undoubtedly had an effect through the endless discussions that went on at meetings and homes, end quote. While Jim clearly believed his own version of the story, the truth likely falls much closer to what Bill and Ruth remembered. However, this is not to say that Jim Burwell did not have some substantial indirect responsibility for the inclusion of As We Understood Him in the steps, but only to question some details of his own version of the story. It is highly probable, for instance, that Jim's participation in this decision occurred not only in the regular Tuesday night meetings, where such things were discussed in a relatively calm fashion, and perhaps even one-on-one with Bill Wilson before or afterwards, but also in the more insistent discussions held at the Parkhurst House in Montclair, where Burwell was staying at the time. Living there gave Jim many opportunities to badger Hank about the need to tone down the God stuff and to constantly reinforce Parkhurst's own belief that less religious arguments should be used in the steps. Hank would have been using Jim's intransigence on this issue as a foil to support his own arguments with Bill over the need to make at least some concessions in the steps to accommodate those drinkers who were theologically challenged. Bill later admitted as much by noting that Hank, quote, argued, he begged, he threatened, he quoted Jimmy to back him up. While all the available evidence supports the fact that Hank Parkhurst was the one making the forceful arguments for the inclusion of As We Understood Him into the step, he was driven to such stridency by the constant harassment of the long-term guest at his home back in Montclair, Jim Burwell.
Wow. Akron's late review of the steps in Chapter 5. Now, there is a final question of interest that needs to be addressed. What influence and impact did Akron have on the formulation of these steps?
Over the years, Bill Wilson made starkly contradictory statements about Ohio's participation in reviewing and critiquing the 12 steps. In one talk, he said, quote, out in Akron, they kind of went along with it, end quote. While in another, he noted, quote, out in Akron, the drunks ripped them 12 steps all in small pieces, end quote. In his usual inaccurate fashion, Wilson was likely referring to different time frames or perhaps to different people's reactions. Whatever the case might be, on the face of it, these two comments are impossible to reconcile without much more contemporary information. In his 1957 book, Alcoholics Comes of Age, Bill claimed that both Paul and Dick Stanley saw the 12 steps early on, and they both, quote, liked the new steps very much. But the Stanley brothers could not have seen the steps until sometime after the middle of December 1938. Like everyone else in Ohio, they had to wait for Bill to finish writing chapters 5 and 6, How It Works and Into Action, before they would be given the opportunity to review the new steps. By that time, the number and most of the wording in them had were almost a foregone conclusion. Indisputable evidence for the late arrival of the steps in Ohio comes from Bill Wilson's December 13th letter to Dr. Bob Smith, in which he addresses several issues, but which makes it clear that they have not spoken or otherwise communicated since they had that last talk on Bill's birthday, November 26th.
Dear Bob, you've probably already heard from Frank Amos. The matter required Mr. Richardson's signature, and it was his secretary who messed up the play by throwing your little document into her wastebasket. Frank tells me he has sent you another. But it was so wonderful to have your phone call followed by all those telegrams. Not a one had come in at that time. I heard your voice over the wire, but they piled in soon after in quantity. I wish I had the addresses of all those who sent them so I could acknowledge every one. But I certainly do want to thank you and all the rest of the folks so much, and I hope you will be sure that every single one knows how I appreciated those wires. It's the kind of thing that makes you think life is worthwhile. God bless you all for thinking of me. On the book, we're going hell-bent for the election. It is practically complete, and I will send you the rest of the chapters within 2 or 3 days. Next step is to make, after one editing, photolithic copies of the whole works. There will be plenty of copies for everyone, and then there will be no excuse for people not saying what they think. Or as the wedding ceremony says, forever hold thy peace. The money situation is not too bad, but it could be an awful lot better. Nothing to worry about right at this minute. Don't think I shall be able to get out there for 2 or 3 weeks. Send in what stories you have. Thanks once more for the birthday greetings. They put a lot of heart in me. Yours, Bill.
Bob and the rest of the Akron members were going to see the 2 final chapters of the book as soon as they were completed, but since they wouldn't be ready for mailing for another quote-unquote 2 or 3 days, the earliest they could have arrived in Ohio was December 17th or 18th. Once there, they would be shown to the people Bob had decided were most favorable to the book project, as opposed to those who condemned it out of hand. Among that select group were the Stanleys, who Bill said, quote, continue to report their approval, end quote, once, quote, the remainder of the book text was developed based on the 12 steps, end quote. Whenever those chapters did arrive in Ohio, they caused a stir among the folks who read them. Clarence Schneider's wife, Dorothy, recalled,
I'll never forget the time the 5th chapter came out. Our 5th chapter. I was staying all night with the Smiths, and Anne and I sat up and we read the thing until 4 a.m. And we thought, now this is it. This is really going to bring people in.
Unfortunately, Dorothy fails to mention exactly where Clarence and Dr. Bob might have been that night, or what they thought of the new chapter and of the 12 steps. But Akron's real chance to review this new material wouldn't come until after, quote, the whole works, end quote, had been professionally edited and multi-lit copies of the book had been printed up for general distribution to all the A members. Once that happened, the Ohio members who were still firmly attached to the Oxford group were not pleased. They were, quote-unquote, disappointed that, quote, there was no mention of the Oxford group in the book, end quote, and that, quote, the 12 steps had replaced the 4 absolutes, which were not mentioned either, end quote. It was certainly not an unexpected response, and is one that lingers in Akron right up until the present day. The evangelical approach of the original 12 step.
While further changes would be made to the 12 steps as they neared their final publication date on April 10th, 1939, and even beyond that point, one striking feature of Bill Wilson's original version received little comment at the time and in later writings about the step. As the quote-unquote trio focused their fight on Bill's insistence that people kneel down and asked for the removal of their shortcomings and on the advisability of using less religious substitutes for the word God, no objection seemed to have been raised about the universal evangelical approach that was explicitly advocated in Wilson's final step. As Bill first wrote it, the 12 steps said, quote, having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs, end quote. The idea that this quote-unquote spiritual experience, parenthesis, that is the direct result of working the steps, close parenthesis, could then be spread not only to alcoholics, but also to quote-unquote others, was a lingering remnant of the Oxford group's overarching goal of expanding until they had revolutionized American society and eventually the rest of the world. While the need to practice these principles in all their affairs was something under the direct control of each individual, the plan was also to carry this message of spiritual awakening to non-alcoholics is ambitious in the extreme. It harkens back strongly to the sentiments Bill once describes as overwhelming them during the Counting Noses meeting in Akron of 1937, in October of 1937.
Once this spectacular notion of rapid growth gripped us, our thinking underwent a sudden change. Our alcoholic imagination certainly had a field day. By temperament, most of us are salesmen, promoters. So we began talking very big. Mere boxcar numbers wouldn't do. We went astronomical. Undoubtedly, we said this was the beginning of one of the greatest medical, religious, and social developments of all time. We would show the medical profession and the sky pilots where they got off. 1 million alcoholics in America, more millions all over the world. Why, we only had to sober up all these boys and girls and sell them God, whereupon they would revolutionize society. A brand new world with ex-drunks running it. Just think of that, folks.
Just think of that, folks. Wilson was a man of vision, and he looked into the future. As he looked into the future, he saw the possibility of Alcoholics Anonymous not only impacting drunks all across the country, but also a majority of the population that had no problem whatsoever with their drinking. This was pure late 1930s Bill Wilson. Unfortunately, fortunately, the phrase, to others, especially alcoholics, was changed to include only alcoholics before the steps saw the final light of day in the published version of the book.
That's the end of chapter 24, editing Bill's steps. You can unmute yourself. I'm sure you'll want to. Wow. That was,
Whew. Thank you.
I must say, I did
Great.
like that version of
Thank
Bill
you,
Wilson.
Bill. Wow. Thanks, Jen.
Bill.
Great job.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bill.
Readers.
Awesome
What a
writing.
wonderful
much.
chapter.
Thank you.
Tremendous.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for reading. It's great.
I love that line. By temperament, most of us are salesmen and promoters. Who identifies with that? Anyone here identify with that? I just love that version of Bill Wilson. I'm glad he was toned down, of course. I'm glad he was toned down. Bill, what a wonderful chap. All these
David,
chapters-
you only had to see me in action the first 2 years after I started meditating, when nobody in my area was meditating at all. I was a major pain in the ass. I was the meditation guy, you know? And I finally realized that all the people that were convincible after 2 years have been convinced. So I shut up about it. But they still call me the meditation guy. And now it's like 16 years after I stopped. So
Yeah.
It reminds me of that line, Bill. If only people done as I wish, the show would be great, right?
yeah.
So let's go. We come to the new people first. I know we have a couple of new people here tonight, but what we do at this point is we go to back to the author, just having been read the chapter with him, and of course Jim and other members. We just go back to and get fresh fresh take on it, Bill. If that's the way of putting it across.
I don't know, David. I love that quote from the October 1937 meeting, and that's right out of Bill Wilson. I mean, he wrote that. You know, it's just amazing. Yeah, boy, all we have to do is sober up all these boys and girls and sell them God, whereupon they will revolutionize society. A brand new world with ex-drunks running it. Just think of that, folks. God, isn't that wonderful? That is just, talk about Bill Wilson having an ego problem, man. He's running off the charts here, but that's beautiful. It's just beautiful. I mean, that's just great. It really, really is. I was waiting for a quote. It must be someplace else in the book. He's got this wonderful quote at one point. He got so angry about all the arguments that he wanted to throw the book out the window. And I thought that would show up in here, and it didn't. So it's got to be someplace else in the book, because I know I did not drive by putting that quote in the book. That was great. So but this whole, I mean, there's he and Jimmy talked about, the arguments that went on all over the place. And Burwell literally says in his Hope Manor talk, and in the Evolution of AA, that thing he wrote up after he did the Hope Manor talk and kind of polished it up, 1947 or 1948. He talks about, Ruth Hawk would type them up and she would send them out to Ohio, and they would mark them all up in Ohio, and they would send them back, and Bill would, and it was like, and we got letters here that says, Bob, come on, Bob. I know, I'm glad you like the chapters, but come on, I need some feedback here, dude. You need to give me something. Nothing. He literally says, and again, it just, he says twice in different places, once in Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age and once in Main Events. He says, he sent him out to Ohio, and quote unquote, Dr. Bob didn't show him around very much. And all they sent him was the warmest support. Now, if that's not damnation with faint praise, I don't know what the hell is. It's just unbelievable. So anyhow, I don't know. Love to have been a fly on the wall during these arguments, and I'm really curious about how Ruth Hawk fit into those arguments. I mean, she had this whole thing going with Hank at the time. And so I think about it. Oh, Bill, Hank, and Fitz, and Ruth was in the room. No, I bet you Ruth was a player, and maybe she was a moderating influence. I don't know. I don't know what role she played, but I don't think she just sat there taking notes, man. I think Ruth Hawk was she was up in people's faces on at least on occasion. And I wish we had more details on that. I really, but you know, isn't it interesting that when Wilson's getting ready to write AA Comes of Age, he starts his correspondence with Ruth saying, you know, I can't remember a whole bunch of this stuff. What the hell? What happened, Ruth? What happened? You know, and there's, as I said, there's one letter here that's all over the internet, but there was like 5 letters that they did back and forth. And, you know, that's good stuff. That's really good stuff. And it's really good stuff because it admits that people just weren't paying attention to details at that time. They were so deep in what was going on. They weren't, you know, oh my God, I got to remember exactly what happened last Tuesday because that's really important. You know, it just, of course, I can't remember what happened last Tuesday, even though I tried today. So, you know, so anyhow, that's good. That's good.
Oh, brilliant.
Short chapter. Sorry, David, it was a short chapter. I know you like longer chapters.
Oh, no, a lot of detail in that, a lot of depth and weight in that, Bill. I do like the long ones as well, though. But let's go to Jim. History only. Great to have Jim doing this with us.
Hi, David. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. A good chapter. It was a short chapter, but it was a good one, you know, a compliment to the last one with the writing of the steps. And it got me thinking. A lot of it based on the presentation that's coming up this next Friday, but we pretty much, you know, come to the conclusion that this was based on Bill's experience. You know, that these are the steps we took is more of an aspirational thing, that this is Bill, you know, talking about his experience. It came up again in this chapter. I guess the question is, did Bill really do these steps? And you know, the first original story in Bill's story from May, June, you know, talks about Ebby told me this, and he said we have to do this, and Ebby said this, and then somewhere along the line in one of the versions I think that we mentioned today, it kind of morphs into I did, and that's how it ends up in Bill's story. You know, where he says, I gave my life to God, and Ebby came and we made a list of my deficiencies, and I told him, you know, 4 or 5 of and we can identify something like 10 of the steps in Bill's story. I have never found any other, and this is a story that Bill retold probably thousands of times in his life, the bedtime, what happened at Towns Hospital. And I have never heard him say, I haven't heard all of the recordings or read everything, but I've never heard him say that he did any steps. In AA Comes of Age, he talks about Ebby came and visited me, and I asked him, what's that PAT formula that you told me about? And then Ebby left and I fell into a depression. And when he talks in his recordings, when he talks about it, he says, Ebby came and visited me and I asked him what those steps were, and he told me, and then he left and I was depressed. Never again does he say what he says in Bill's story, that I did the steps. Have you ever heard anything else where Bill says, you know, I turned my life over to God, and I did a 5th step and we made a list and that sort of thing?
Nope. Good point, Jim. Good point. Hey, listen, David, before we get into questions, I just got a comment on you know, the first page of this chapter. There's that one, he says, I came downstairs and Howard A was there. Howard A. Look, that just stuff like that makes me crazy. But I mean, but as we were reading it today, I was realizing how really crazy. He says, you know, so Howard and his friend reacted violently. He says, you got too much God in these steps. You'll scare people away. Too much God in these steps. Have you read the stories in the back of the book, dude? Because I mean, that's all they talk about in the stories in the back of the book. I mean, it's such an anachronistic putting things back in that just, I mean, now if it was Hank Parker's, he'd still be bitching about that. I got that. I got that. But let's face it. I mean, it's just, we just did that in that last chapter of the chapter before, you know, about how much, how simple the program was, you know. I turned my life and my will over to God. And in those cases, you know, we even know that, you know, like when Dr. Bob's talking to Clarence Schneider, he's not saying God or God as you understand or a higher power. He's saying Jesus.
Yeah.
Clarence, this is Jesus. Ask him to help you with your alcohol problem. Jesus, this is Clarence. He's got a problem and he needs your help. You know, it's like, that's what they were doing, you know? So, yeah, I mean, if I was Hank Parkhurst in the room, I'd be bitching and moaning about some of that stuff myself. But you know, it's just, it's not as if everybody was complaining about this, you know, or it just, I don't know, that just caught me out as there's so many.
Oh, we lost Mr. Bill. We lost Bill.
There's so many details in there that I just don't think are accurate. I repeated it, David. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. I'm done.
No, just for a moment. We'll come back to you shortly. But did we have some new members? I noticed. Tresca, I know you're definitely. We had a chat before. Would you like to just come in first and maybe say hello to us and how you came across Bill's book?
Hey there, Tresca Alcoholic from
Hi,
Oakland,
Tresca.
California. Yeah, I read Writing the Big Book a couple of years ago. And coincidentally, my sponsor was also reading it, and we would call each other and excited. We're both pretty big nerds, you know. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Bill. Memory is a really strange thing, you know, as you know, when you're doing amends or whatever, people remember things differently, you know. It's and trying to write a history based on memories is, you know, challenging, I'm sure. But Jim, bringing up did Bill work the steps? I've heard it said that Bob didn't get sober until he was humbled enough to go make his 9th step amends, and that is Founder's Day, that he came back that day.
Shall we put that question to Bill Schaberg? You heard it said. Should we put that to Bill? Shall we put that question to Bill, Tresca? What you heard said. Do you want to ask him the question?
If there's a question in there and you can find it, sure. Thank you so
very
much.
Bill, you heard it said. What do you think?
Well, no, certainly Bob made his amends, you know, and he had a slip before he made the amends, and he didn't have any slips after he made the amends. So there's I mean, it'd be crazy to deny some sort of cause and effect going on there, but to say that he had pulled it out of the list of 12 or even the list of 6, it's what the Oxford Group people were doing. That's what they were doing. That's what you had to do. You had to go make amends to people. You had to mend the fences. You had to repair your life so you could lead a good Christian life going forward. It's not, Jesus, it's not like, there's nothing new in the 12 steps. The packaging is new. The packaging is new, and the verbiage is new. But there isn't a single spiritual, religious, inspired thing in the 12 steps that wasn't just all over the place. And I don't just mean in the 1930s. I mean for the last 2,000 years. You know, it's just, I mean, we need to be proud of the fact that we have those 12 steps and they read the way they do read, and they've helped so many people get sober and stay sober. You know, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's a blueprint. They say a blueprint, but it's a blueprint for spirituality. It's a path. It's right there. If that's what you want to be doing, that's what you want to be doing. And or you should be doing it, if however you want to package that. But you know, but there's nothing new in there. And the fact that Bob had been in the Oxford Group preaching this kind of stuff for all those years and hadn't obviously done it. And then all of a sudden he caves. He says, Bill talks about, Bob comes to him and says, you know, I'm one of those tight-fisted, close to the vest Vermont guys, doesn't tell anything, but I'm going to tell you everything right now. So he does even a 5th step, what we would call a 5th step today. And again, is that anything new? No, that's what the Oxford Group is telling him. Been doing for the last 2.5 years, or however long he'd been in the Oxford Group before Bill Wilson showed up on his doorstep. So anyhow, just thank you, Tresca. Good to see you here, and I'm glad you enjoyed the book. And yeah, nerds.
Thumbs up from
Bill,
Mr.
I
Chandler.
want to mention to you that I got a message today that I don't know if Javier's here today, but our friend in Mexico got his Creación de Doble A.
All right, all right.
So the
Jim.
book is available in Spanish in Mexico, and people are getting it now.
Good.
Wow.
Good.
That's
And
great. And on that, Bill, is there any update on your publication? You said at the end of the month. Is it the end of the month you have something coming up, isn't it?
Well, we have a court date on Thursday,
Thursday.
and I got a bill. Talk about sticker shock. I got a bill from the lawyer for the last month. Oh, they did a lot of work preparing the documents that had to go into this court case that they submitted. But no, he's still selling the hardback online. There's no ebook online. There's no paperback online. And I'm working with a woman who's preparing all the files I need to publish that by myself. And we're getting closer with that. And I'm even thinking maybe I'll just put it up, even if he doesn't, if somehow they don't force him to take the version that he's selling already. I'll just undercut the price or something and sell it as a second. We're selling it as a second edition, revised, enlarged, and corrected. And the paperback's going to include the 10 appendices, which the old paperback never did. And I don't know. Was just talking to Lucy, my granddaughter Lucy, and my wife, the lady Sarah, about how we going to price this thing, And so anyhow, it's moving. It's glacial at times. It's expensive, but I don't really care. I mean, when I got into this thing, the lawyer said, this could cost you way more money than you think. And I was like, dude, I'm in. We're just going to do this because this guy has pissed me off so much that,
Hey, Bill.
And he doesn't
Real
know
alcoholic.
he doesn't know who he's messing with, just
Love it. Thank you, Bill, for sharing that with us. And we go to Kate, who's one of our readers today, and she's in Seattle.
Hi, thank you. And Bill, I just love your writing. I was really struck by something. There's a big contingent of people up here in Seattle who insist that Jimmy Burwell, he's the one. He made up the phrase and he put it in there. And I'm glad to have the book to refer to again. But my whole question is, when did Jimmy get sober? Do you know even the month and the year that he got sober?
January 1938, the first time. Then he went out and drank in June of 1938, and he was out for about 7 days. I think, again, those details are in the book. And he came back in mid-June of 1938 while Wilson's trying to write. It was maybe like the first week. Wilson's trying to, Jimmy's out there and Wilson's trying to write. There is a solution. I think it had a profound impact on him. And Ebby just came back also at the same time. But anyhow, he got sober in June of 1938 and stayed sober until he died.
And then the steps were actually written in December 38, right?
Yeah, so there was no steps at that point.
Yeah. Right.
No. But it was also in late May of 1938, before Jimmy got sober, that Bill wrote these 2 versions or maybe even 3 versions of his story. And it is in the story. That's where it is. Like people, it's one of the big burning questions of in Alcoholics Anonymous history, when did it enter the story? And of course, if you look at what Hank Parkhurst stuck into Bill's story about why don't you do your own conception of God kind of thing, people say, well, that's what Ebby was preaching when he showed up in late November and in early December of 1934 when Bill got sober. And I don't believe that for a freaking minute. If there's a chance of that, it's so remote, I'm not even giving it 1%, He was talking Oxford group to those people. That's what he was doing, And that's one man's opinion. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Very informed opinion, nevertheless. We'll go into GGD in Oregon.
Thank you, David. Gigi, alcoholic here in Eugene, Oregon. And of course, I really, really love this chapter. One of the things that I've said for years about Bill Wilson is that his genius to me was that he took spiritual principles and put them into a a way that alcoholics could understand and utilize easily. So my question is, you have a copy of the Jim Burwell original manuscript, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Does he have any notations in that copy?
Very little. In the first page and a half of how it works, there's a pencil underlines for like on our knees. He underlines the things that got taken out, but that's it. And of course, anybody comparing the Multilith to the April 10th publication can see that those things were taken out. So there's nothing there. What's important about Jimmy's copy, aside from the fact that it's the sainted, and I think of him as the sainted Jim Burwell. I don't know what he'd think about that characterization, but I wouldn't be sober without Jim Burwell. So let's not go there. But it's what he did was he not only wrote on the title page with all the stories who wrote the stories, but we know that kind of stuff also. But on the opposite that, he's written at the top of the page the list of people who helped write the big book that came out in April of 1939. And he's got 5 people from New York and 6 people from Ohio that he claims stayed continuously sober, 11 people. And below that, he's got 36 more names, almost equal number in Ohio and New York, that he claims drank at least one more time.
Oh, interesting.
And I've got a huge write-up on that book because I've had it for sale for 1 million years at a very expensive price because I really don't want to sell it. If somebody wants to cough up that much cash, Sarah told me I gotta sell it. So, but if the write-up's got a picture of that stuff, and it's just, I'd be happy to send it to you, Gigi, or anybody else. Send me an email, Bill@Athena Rare Books, and I will send. It's like with photos and stuff. It's like, I don't know, 14 pages long, I think. So, well,
I'd love to see that. Yes, I will send you an email. Thank you.
GG in Oregon. If there's we have Azel. Azel, over to you.
hey, Zell, it wouldn't be a reading night if you didn't have a question for me. Hi, dude. How you doing?
I'm good, Bill. Thank you.
You and Gigi. I don't get my ticket punched unless the two of you have a question.
Well, Gigi just brought up something that I was thinking about, and that was the writing the Golden Road to Devotion, I think it is.
Yeah, John Barton's thing. Yep.
Yeah, for me. So I was it just came to mind in your conversation with her, if that was something that you were familiar with, and I was sure you were. But there are many, and it talks about the first 40, and then it talks about members that I had never heard of.
Yeah, John's a serious historian. He really, really is. And it's funny because early on, John and I had a couple of run-ins. He sent me some stuff. I mean, this is years ago. I mean, maybe even before I started working on this thing. I can't remember. But and he had a long quote from Bill Wilson. And I called him up. I said, "That's a fabulous quote. Where the hell did you get that quote?" Well, he had made the quote up. He cobbled together a bunch of stuff, and he said, I checked with Art Sheehan and I checked with so and so, and they said it was okay to do that. I said, it's not okay to do that. You can't be doing that. So John grew in his devotion to primary document research, and that Golden Road to Devotion is everybody goes, well, who are the first 40 guys? Who are the 40 people on October 15th, 1937? And who are the 100 people that, what are the 100 people? Blah, blah, blah. So John was, he was going down that road and collecting data and information. And I refer to that thing. I trust the information in there implicitly. I mean, John's done good work. He was head of the AA archive in New Jersey, And outside of Stepping Stones and GSO, it's the best archive in the country. And they're just, the stuff they've got there is really amazing. And I always tease John that he says, it wasn't New York AA, it was New Jersey AA because Parkhurst and all these guys lived over in New Jersey, And and you know what? He almost does say that, But John Barton's a good man. He's finally retired. One of these days, I've been on him about doing more work, primary document research stuff, and he said when I retire, and he's gotten retired, but now he's got a little side job, so I'm not too sure about just exactly what's going on. But I would trust his material, and he's accessible if you got a question, or if you need a contact for him, just let me know, and I'll be happy to send that to you. But yeah, that's it. It's online, the Golden Road of Devotion. I don't even know. I've got a copy on my thing. Oh, by the way, David, yes, Wednesday, today's Saturday. Wednesday, my granddaughter, Lucy Rose, drove Sarah and I up to Brown University, and we handed over my archive of 7,000 pages of collated and organized documents that are going to be available probably starting in September for anybody who wants to go up there and see them and copy them.
What?
Copy them. And and there's a finding aid that I put together that's 38 pages long of everything that's in there, page by page, everything that's in there. If you want to know if you got a John D. Rockefeller letter from March 24th, 1938, you search and it's like, oh yeah, it's in this folder. And it's the fifth letter in this folder kind of thing. So again, I would be happy to send anybody the Golden Road of Devotion. I'd be happy to send them to Jim Burwell right up on the copy of the multilith copy. And I'd be happy to send you the finding aid for the stuff that went up to Brown University. For people who don't know, Brown University, the John Hay Library is the rare book library at Brown University. And they have the largest collection in the world, to my knowledge, the largest collection in the world of temperance and alcohol-related materials. A guy named Chester H. Kirk put this temperance collection together, huge temperance collection, and gave it to them, and they've been building on it ever since. Ernie Kurtz interview tapes are there. There's a ton of old Hank Parkhurst letters that he wrote to his sons in the late 1940s. There's just I've been up there like 4 times, to look at stuff. But there's 3 boxes, 180 folders, 7,000 documents in the William H. Shaberg Early AA History Archive. And she thought she got to take my Word doc and they got to do stuff in Excel. And I don't do Excel. I loathe Excel. So anyhow, I did all the stuff they needed. And I spent months organizing that stuff, and I'm going to start getting on people like Jim and Patrick O'Donnell and Kevin Hanlon, and people say, look, you gotta organize this stuff so that they'll take it, because they don't have somebody who's going to do all that work. It took me months and months of work. I had piles of paper all over the place, 7,000 pieces of paper in piles. It had to be organized and separated, and then I had to do the folders, and I did the folders, and then she said, well, she would really like the folders to be in my kind of folders, with handwritten on them, and I did all of that stuff. But I did all of that stuff because I didn't want if I get hit by a truck 6 months ago, Sarah would have thrown all that stuff out. There were just piles on the floor, for God's sakes, and that's valuable value. I mean, it's all that hard work needs to be put someplace so that people can access it and copy it. And so, yeah, if anybody wants that finding aid just to get an idea of what the hell's in there, and it won't be available. She thought maybe in September it'd be up and available. But Bill at AthenaRareBooks.com. Be happy to do any of those 3 things or anything else. And I forgot, I don't think that's what I started to talk about, David, but I don't remember what I started talking about because I'm 82 years old. I can't remember. We always say, I said to Sarah the other day, we're just going to say CRS. Can't remember shit. CRS. So
everything's relevant, isn't it? Everything is interconnected anyway, Bill, at some level. Everything is interconnected. Jim Worley was licking his lips there when you started talking. I couldn't believe it. Jim was going, oh, yeah, we'll have some of that. Jim, do you want to come back and comment on that?
Listen, to this group, to members of this group who've been regular members all the time, I just want to note that a friend, Randy Enns,
Yes.
who's just always struggling with
Oh, no,
massive
don't
health
say.
problems, and heroically, in my opinion, heroically struggling with those health problems, has 19 years of sobriety on Friday.
Oh, Randy, we do miss Randy, yeah.
So
Yeah.
just wanted a heads up, because quite frankly, I got busy on Friday and didn't send him an email, so I'm gonna have to do that when I get off the air. So
Thanks for mentioning that, Bill. Let's just jump to Jim. I'd like to hear what Jim's saying, because Jim, your eyes really lit up behind them glasses there, Jim. I could see it.
I just wanted to mention, Brown also has Dr. Bob, most of Dr. Bob's papers and things and they're available digitally. Will your stuff be available digitally online? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't know what they're doing in the transition from hard copy to digital. I know, like Stepping Stones, what they're doing great work at Stepping
Oh,
Stones,
yeah.
making that stuff available. But what they're basically doing is at Stepping Stones is when people request stuff, they say, "Oh, okay," and they go, "It's not up online," so they go scan it and they get it up online. Oh, Jim, I got to tell you, one of the bad things that happens is I sent the archive off on Thursday. One of my regular questioners sent me a couple of questions, and I knew the answer because I looked at the footnote in the endnote in my book. The answer was in main events, but I don't have a copy of main events anymore. It's up in Rhode Island. So I could say, but I did say, I said, I know that's one of the things that a lot of people ask for, that main events document. And I was, and Stepping Stones put it up. They've got it up there.
Yeah.
That's available up there. So I said, I don't have it anymore, but you can go get it there. So, but yeah, I realized that once the stuff was out the door, I was going to be pissed off that I couldn't find something. And that happened within 24 hours.
Jim, you didn't want to comment on any more? You're good?
No, I'm good. I can't think of anything else.
At the moment, I know.
Bill,
Bill,
Let's go to dinner.
Bill, will you just mention the three things that people can get from you, just to qualify what they can get from you? Can you just mention those three things if people
Yeah,
want?
I've got a great write-up on the Jim Burwell copy of the original manuscript, the multilith copy. And it's a PDF, I don't know, 14, 15 pages long. Be happy to send that to you. I've got the finding aid for all the documents I just sent up to Brown University. That's like 38-page Word document, searchable, or PDF. Again, that's also searchable. And the third thing is, Azel mentioned John Barton's The Golden Road of Recovery. And I know I've got that. I better have that someplace digitally. I think I've got that someplace digitally that I can send that to people if they would be interested in that. And that's John's, he kind of tells a story about each one of these guys as they came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's done a really good job with it. He really, really has. He's tinkered with it over the years a number of times. It's good reading. And again, he's a very credible researcher. So, now, by the way, I just got to say, you would think that the way I talk sometimes, that if you just go research this stuff, we're all going to agree. That is not the case. There's always some holes that people can extrapolate on, and I do some extrapolation myself at times. And then there's just stuff where people read stuff and they read it different, I mean, Kevin comes up and visits us once a month for lunch, and I'm always surprised when he's like, "Well, I don't think that's right." Whatever I'm saying, mainly because he's seen documents I haven't seen for that, but that's okay. That's because, as I always say, he and his partner Dan Carosino know more about AA history than any five of us other guys put together, or women. So
to be a fly.
I'm seeing hands up, but we're coming close to dinner time here. So let's
okay. Let's go to Azel. Let's go to Azel, and then we'll do Bobette, and we'll finish there then. Azel, did you want to unmute?
No, go to Bobette because I've already asked a question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's just a quick comment. It's Bill, thank you. I feel so honored that I was there. It's sort of like economics when these numbers come out, these economic numbers come out, and everybody reads the numbers, but the interpretation, I think a lot of that is it's fascinating how the same words are interpreted by different people. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Sure, sure. And you know, that whole just arguing, you know, Ernie Kurt says when you get two people with contradictory information on the same event, that the researcher should rejoice, he says, because, you know, now you got to figure out what really went on. And yeah, this whole memory thing. I mean, we were just talking about, and I was thinking about it, you know, a book came in that I ordered from Amazon 10 days ago. And I showed it to my wife and I said, "This is the book you told me to order for so-and-so." And she was like, "I never told you to order that book. I've never seen that book before in my entire life." And she wasn't giving up on that, man. She was like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, dude. And I said, "No, I even told you it's the number 2 book in this series. And you said, just go with it. Don't get the number 1 book." I never said anything like that at all. So, you know, we just all have to be really, really careful about, you know, taking things as carved in stone true kind of thing. You know, it's even if you don't have 2 contradictory things, you know, we just got to be really, really careful. And what you want to do is, as a conscientious historian, is to put things together in a credible way. And if somebody else comes up with a more credible way of putting those things together, then give it up and salute them, because that's what we're looking for. We're always looking to get closer to what really happened. That's the goal. What really happened. But I mean, my wife and I can't agree on what really happened 10 days ago, you know, so.
That's great. That's great. Hazel, did you want to quickly come in? And I have a little question.
I did, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to kind of explore was that section that talks about the arguments over religion versus psychology, and asked if your opinion has changed, broadened, lessened in terms of how we look at that in today's AA.
Well, yeah, Hazel, I think we've moved much more. Let's. The problem with those 2 terms is it's like they're like sandboxes. You know, you put them in and then you're stuck with that. That's what it is. You know, I think of it more in terms these days of the success and expanding success of secular AA as an organization. I mean, I'm just talking about, you know, I mean, Kit and Gigi and a couple of people here go to this Sunday meeting we go to, you know, and let's say there's 20 people on that meeting. I'm going to guarantee you that 12 of those people have no supernatural elements in their life. They have higher powers, but they have no supernatural elements in their lives. And they're staying successfully sober for decades and decades and decades. And you know, so this, and it's so funny because there are people, I go to this Zoom meeting on Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday, and the regular group's a little bit bigger during the week, and there's people that show up every single day for that thing. And the fact of the matter is, there are people on there, if you listen to them long enough, and I've been listening to them since just after COVID started, you know, that if you listen to them long enough, you say, "Oh, that guy's a secular guy. Oh, that woman's a secular woman." But people aren't just, you know, there are a couple of people that bitch and moan about it all the time, but most of the people are they're just flying under the radar, man. Look, I'm staying sober. I have a spiritual practice. I have a spiritual life. I understand that my recovery depends on a vital spiritual experience. I need to keep that thing going, you know. And Jim failed to enlarge his spiritual life, man. And so we all got to be doing that. But it's just, it seems to me that AA, certainly our culture, but I think AA as a whole has gotten more and more and more. I've been sober 44 years. It's gotten much more secular over those years. And it's not just people who are, I'm only going to secular meetings. You know, we got a couple of those people. I'm okay with that, but I'm not one of those guys. I'm going to these meetings all the time, and you know, sometimes sometimes I have to hold my nose and keep my mouth shut. But because people, you know, you don't want people saying, if people say this is what I did, man, I am good with anything they did that's keeping them sober, keeping them away from the first. I'm good with anything they did. But if they start saying, you have to do this and you have to do that because it says in the book that you have to, I'm out of Sunday meeting. A couple of people may remember like 4 weeks ago. I damn near I almost quit the meeting. But my sponsor, King Dykeman of 35 years, told me I could never leave a meeting for any reason whatsoever. So I held my nose and kept my mouth shut, and I stayed through that goddamn meeting because this guy was just do, you know. Okay. See, David? See,
Well,
David?
I'm caught in a position because Drew put up his hand. He snuck in his hand because I left Hazel in. Now I'm playing the weak card now. I'm a bit weak here, Bill, so I have to kind of be at a stronger way. So I'm going to be diplomatic here.
No, we're going to go to Drew. Go to Drew.
Gotta go to Drew. There you go. Gotta go to Drew.
How are you guys doing? My name is Andrew and I'm an alcoholic. Can you
Hello,
guys hear
Andrew.
me?
Hey,
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Very
good.
good.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I really needed it. I do have a question about our good friend Jim Burwell. I got sober in San Diego, California.
Jimmy's hometown. Yeah.
A lot of the guys that mentored me were mentored by him. And they laid it on really heavy that he came up with the God as, they laid it on really thick. It was gospel.
Yeah.
Here in San Diego, that Jimmy we even have archives. I probably shouldn't say it, but at AA Central here in San Diego, there is an archive and there's a section dedicated to that. And I'll just leave it there. But my question is, I went to a meeting and I talked to this historian guy. I'm going to leave him nameless. And he is of the opinion that Jimmy Burwell really didn't have anything to do with that. But what he did have something to do with was starting clubhouses / fellowship AA. So that's a lot of what you find here in San Diego. They stay sober on the buddy program, and they go to meetings every day, and sometimes 3 or 4 meetings a day, which is cool. It's secular in nature. But he told me Jimmy Burwell started that whole phenomenon. My question to you, is that true? That the whole fellowship and clubhouse thing came from Jimmy Burwell?
I'm not going to touch the fellowship thing because I'm a fellowship guy myself. So I'm very happy that Jimmy Burwell did that if he did that. But he went to Philadelphia. You know, he left New Jersey and went to Philadelphia. And I think that's where the first clubhouse thing happened. Now, we are outside of my area of expertise and investigation, and I've heard the same stories you have. But I got to tell you, there's at least one guy floating around AA history stuff who sends me stuff periodically with, 8-page long emails about Jimmy Burwell in Pennsylvania. And you're like, I don't know why I get that stuff or what I'm supposed to make out of it. But yeah, I do believe he probably did in fact start that stuff. Yes. But again, I'm on speculation. You're hearing it out there where, of course they're going to say that out there, but I've heard it elsewhere here that, he did that kind of stuff. And yeah, good to hear from you, Drew. Good man. Thank you.
If I may, clubhouses. Jimmy was very big on clubhouses, but they were in other parts of the country too. Now, John Barton, after I met you the first time, Bill, at the book launch, I went to New Jersey and got a guided tour of the landmarks by John Barton.
Yeah.
And he took me to the first clubhouse, which was there in New Jersey, still exists. But anyway, he was big on that. He had some letters in some of the correspondence between Jimmy Burwell and Bill Wilson. He asked him a lot, Bill, what do you think about 12-step houses? And so this was something, if that's what maybe you're talking about, and he was asking Bill, he said, well, we know pretty much, because this was during the time of when Bill was writing the traditions. And Jimmy said, well, we know about the clubhouses and things, and what do you think about the 12 step houses? And Bill wrote back and said, well, I don't know that much, but probably like the clubhouses, there are good ones and bad ones, But yeah, I know Jimmy was involved with that sort of thing, and they called them 12th step houses, kind of like what we might call halfway houses today. So that's a little bit I know about that.
Thank you, Jim. Bill Shaver, I have to ask you this little question because it's not long, it's a unique thing. But can you clarify this? I might have missed something in the reading today. I was trying to figure this out. Yeah, just one little bit. It says in the November 26th letter, Bill is sending to Bob. You say here, Wilson said on the book we are going hell-bent for election. Is that election American election, or is that what election is that? What
It's
election?
just a phrase.
Oh, just a phrase.
It's an American cliche. An American cliche. Just help.
I was trying to figure out I was trying to figure out what that was.
In fact,
as Bill Shaver said, we're coming close.
Hell bent for leather.
Hell bent for leather. I got it.
Yeah, there are different. It's just this kind of a saying.
I got it. And Bill, like
being fast.
As Bill says, he's got no supernatural beings, but he says, and I quote, he says, I'm loaded, he said, with mystery. I just love that quote.
Yeah.
I just love that quote. I'm going to put it in the chat for people, but now we're going back to Bill to lead us out. Thank you, Bill Shaver.
Thank you all. Thank you all. All the leaders, all the comments, all the questions. I love this community. I love this community. So I'd like to close with the evening Gatha, which I understand to be a personal message to myself. Let me respectfully remind you, William, that life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunities are lost. You really need to strive to be awakened to the present moment. Take heed. This night, tonight, your days are diminished by one. Do not squander your life.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Wow.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks everyone for reading.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Is this going on every week? Is this reading every week?
Yes, we are. We're here on there. We have 31 chapters. So as we know, but this 24. So we got 7 left.
Now, are you going to repeat it once you're done, or
well, we will, but I don't know if Bill can. I don't know if we haven't got any commitment from Bill Shaver. We might just do it again. But we're looking at something to do. We're going to try and do it in a week. we're aiming for a week or a month. We're going to do it in one. We're going to try and do it like that. So
Well, David, this is the 7th time around. Am I correct? Seventh.
Yeah. It takes 9 months, you see. It takes 9 months to do it weekly. So we're going to try and get it down a bit. So obviously I don't want to preempt Bill Shaver and what he's going to do. Because he's got, as you heard, he's got so much going on. And, Yep. He's got so much going on.
Well, come back, Drew.
Yeah.
Come back for the last chapter.
Great meeting you.
Yeah.
I got sober in LA, so I had a lot of the same experiences that you're talking about.
Hey, David, are you having a meeting tomorrow?
We're having a meeting tomorrow, Carla.
Okay, I'll be there. I've been out of town for the past 2 weeks.
We missed you, Carla.
All right.
We missed you for the first 2 weeks. We missed you, and then we kind of Carla who.
All right, I'll be there.
Thank you, Carla.
Good night, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Bobette. Nice to see you.
Good night,
Everybody,
everyone.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. See you later.
See you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Goodbye.
See you, Nikki.
Bye.
Thank you. And Zels, we're good. We're out. See you, Drew.
Thank you.
And Tim is in Oklahoma. No, Tim is in Chattanooga. And Fred B. So I'm out. See you.
All right.